What's up? It's your guy Jordan Paris back with another really important video. Buckle up. This is a long one, but as always, I'm promising you here that it is worth your time. I wouldn't be putting it out on this channel if it wasn't worth your time. And this is something that I haven't shared, at least not in ungated form. So this video is basically one of the most important topics in the agency operations realm, and that is hiring. Hiring doesn't have to be guesswork. You can boil your hiring down to a science where you can say, yeah, this person is an A player, this person's a B player, and this person over here, they're a C player. And you can reliably pick out those A players and bring them onto your team. And as you know, if you're growing your agency, people become all of the problems. And hiring is a big thing, especially if you're scaling, bringing on more clients. You have to constantly be hiring. I always say, always be hiring. And so this video is going to teach you the hiring process, soup to nuts, A to Z. And it's really a summary of the book called Who? The A Method for Hiring by ghSmart. I don't really reinvent the wheel, guys. Like, this stuff's out there. The wheel is great. There's no need to reinvent it. And when I was going through this book a few years ago, I mean, maybe 4 years ago at this point, what I did was I wrote like 2,500 words worth of notes. And so I put that in a document, a Google Doc, and then a few years later, I recorded a video over that document. So today's episode, today's YouTube video is going to be me going over that 2,500 word doc. I will also put the doc in the description of this episode. And guys, if you're watching and you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and do that. I mean, you're missing out if you're not. This is agency operations. This is scaling your business. And often the most important part of scaling a business is operations, keeping the clients that you already have rather than going out and getting new clients. I have a past video on that. I will link it as well. And so a lot of what I talk about teaches you how to scale your agency with ease without having to sign 5 or 10 clients per month. You can scale to $1 million in 3 years just signing 2 to 3 clients per month if you have dialed in operations. So subscribe here if you haven't already. Now, without further ado, please enjoy today's video on the hiring process. Let me know what you think. Hey everybody, Jordan Paris here, and in this video I'm going to be going over the hiring process that we use at Zeus and that I've used in my previous agencies for much of the past few years. Now, I get so many compliments on our team members from other entrepreneurial friends, from partners, from customers, like, how did you find this person? I don't know where you found this person, but wow, what a great employee. What a great team member. I just continually get compliments. People say that I've got a knack for finding A players. And it's not really me. I don't really have a knack for it. I've just read a really helpful book called Who? And we can click onto that here. I highly recommend that you purchase this book if you are a business owner. This is a must read. Who? It's by Geoff Smart and Randy Street. Back to our hiring process document here. This document that we're going to go over today, this is inspired by that book. So, what's this? Well, this shares the process from sourcing candidates all the way in the beginning, right? Interviewing them to officially hiring A players, not B or C players. And that's the premise of the book and of this document here. We're going to suss out B and C players. We're going to learn how to identify them and how to also identify A players so that we can bring them into our organization and avoid bringing C players into our organization. You can have a few B players. You know, you're not going to have all A players, and that's okay. But we definitely want to make sure that the C players, we suss them out and eliminate them during the process. So first off, the best talent sources, 5 of them right here. Referrals from your business network, people that you know, perhaps in the mastermind. Referrals from your personal network. Hire an external recruiter, hire a recruiting researcher, or hire an internal recruiter. The book goes over those 5 different methods right there. Honestly, what I like to do, my go-to, is a website called talent.hubstaff.com. Love Hubstaff. They're a time tracking time tracking cool. They're a time tracking tool, but they have at talent.hubstaff.com, they've got a free job posting platform where there's so many talented people from all over the world. So if you're looking for overseas talent outside of the United States, specifically the Philippines and other countries like that, talent.hubstaff.com is the way to go. Like, there's so many good people on there. Every time I go through the hiring process, whether I'm sourcing candidates from there or LinkedIn or anywhere, I'm just continually amazed by how many great and beautiful and talented people there are out there in the world. The hiring process always gives me life in that way. So tactically, you can look at these 5 here, but I would say, like, tactically, talent.hubstaff.com. That is the way. Really easy and free. So here we go. We're going to dive into the A method for hiring by ghSmart. That's the name of their company, the authors of the book. And this is the method that they teach in the book. So we're going to start here. Define what you want. And you're going to establish criteria, hiring criteria that fit your strategy and culture using a scorecard. All right, so you're going to put together this scorecard. And on that scorecard, it's going to include a mission, right? What's the purpose that explains why we need this role? The outcomes, what we must get done, 3 to 8 items. The competencies, characteristics, skills, demands of the organizational culture, your culture. Examples are treats people with respect, they're trustworthy, they're kind, they're ambitious, right? If you're in a sales role, if you're looking for like an SDR or something like that. So take a look at this. This is an example of a scorecard. We've got a role description / mission, right? The customer success specialist is responsible for helping our current customers with their operating systems, answering all the customers' questions, checking in with them weekly, and basically work one-on-one with the customer after implementation to ensure successful adoption of all features. And then you can see we've got the responsibilities listed out right here, 5 of them, which is a pretty healthy list. Again, we're looking for between 3 and 8. Success metrics is a work in progress, right? How do we know this person is doing a good job, right? Having those success metrics can be very helpful. Skills, and then characteristics. So there you have an example. And I'm going to X out my beautiful face here. You won't get to see it any longer, which is unfortunate, but anyhow, it's going to make it easier for me to get back to my document right here. So we're going to establish that scorecard. Once you've got your scorecard, you know kind of what you're looking for. So the first step in the process, is where it gets fun, is this screening interview. The purpose of this interview is to get a feel for whether or not the candidate aligns with your scorecard. Now, you're not going to know everything after this interview, but at least you're going to know whether or not you should proceed with the rest of the hiring process or just suspend it right here. And you ask a number of questions during this screening interview. But the first thing that you want to do is set expectations at the beginning of the call. Say something like, hey, look, I want to spend the first 10, 15 minutes getting to know you, and then I'm going to open it up to questions that you may have. So then we get into the questions, right? What are your career goals? And what you're looking for here is, do these align with your company values and where you're trying to go? Someone who, for example, wants to be a manager doesn't match an individual contributor position, and you should probably move on. Next question that you might ask is, what are you really good at professionally? And you get them to list a bunch of things. Listen for the strengths that match the job at hand, that match the scorecard that we were talking about a minute ago. Do those line up well? If so, then it might be, that's a good indicator. That's a good thing. It's a plus. If the skills that they have are not very aligned with what you're looking for, then unfortunately they might not be a fit for the role. Now, this is a good question. What are you not so good at or not interested in doing professionally? A players, they're not going to give you a cookie cutter BS answer. And by a cookie cutter BS answer to this question, what are you not good at? And I say, what are you not good at? What are you bad at? And they're like, oh, honestly, I'm like a little, I can be a little bit too hardworking sometimes. And I'm just like, okay. So they're not entirely being truthful here. Like everybody has weaknesses. And I do take that as that's a negative. When people give a cookie cutter BS answer like that, doesn't completely eliminate them right there, but it's definitely not a good thing. I don't like that. I want people to be honest right here. And then, who are your last 5 bosses, and how will you rate them on a 1 to 5 scale when talking with them? And I actually don't like that question. What we've done at our organization is we've changed this question, and I need to change it in the document here as well. But I ask people about their last job, and then I say, okay, what did you like about that job? And then I say, all right, well, that's awesome. What did you dislike about your last job? And judging by their answer, you could tell a lot by their answer to that question. Sometimes people will dig their own grave right here, and they'll be like trashing their boss and like, I didn't like this, I didn't like that. And, they're not realizing the irony that they're talking to their potential next boss. So that, judging by their answer to that question, that could be a nail in the coffin for some people, and could tell you that, hey, we're not going to move on to the next step in the interview process. So some general tips for this interview is follow up on their answers by getting curious, ask questions, begin with what, how, tell me more, why, ask for examples, right? Stop at the stop signs. If somebody says something that's like, oh, wow, that's really interesting, dive deeper. Ask them to list off an example. Can you give me an example of something like that? Next, we kind of covered this earlier, but ask yourself, do this person's strengths match my scorecard? Are their weaknesses manageable? Am I thrilled about bringing this person in for a series of interviews? Or even, am I thrilled about potentially down the line introducing them to my team, introducing them to that environment? You want to feel like you found the one right here. Like I find myself wanting to test people. I want to like them. Maybe I'll just move them on to the second interview and see, just test them a little more, like see if they can really rise to the occasion. If you find yourself in that frame of mind here, then that's a sign you need to screen them out. Again, you want to feel like you found the one right here. And by the way, in the second interview, when you do move on, some of the people that you felt like, oh, they're the one, some of them are going to disappoint you in the second, much more rigorous and in-depth interview. And that's okay. It's all part of the process, but we'll get there in a minute. The last little tip here is screen fast. Don't linger with bad candidates. And then the last thing that I would add that isn't officially on here, as we'll continue to cover in the next interview as well, is when you open it up to ask for them to ask questions of you and your company, if they don't ask you any questions, like they don't have any questions, they just aced the interview, but they don't have any questions, like that's a bad sign. If they're not interested in your company, they're not interested in getting to know the vision, they're not interested in what the mission is, like they're not interested in any of that. Like what? Why are you even here? Well, we know why they're here. They might just be looking for a job, any job, and they don't really care what kind of company it is. You don't want those candidates. You want candidates who care about your company, want to know about your company. They're curious about your mission and vision in your company, not just the compensation. Right? That's another thing. If they just ask about the compensation and have no other questions like about your company, they're not getting curious about your company, like that's a bad sign too. Honestly, that's the biggest thing for me in this screening interview. If they don't have questions at the end when I open it up to them, most times I do not bring them into the second interview. I kind of just eliminate them right there. So that's the screening interview for you. Next, you've got your second interview, which is called the top grading interview. And the purpose here, as I describe it, is you're really trying to step into somebody's shoes. You're trying to step into the candidate's shoes. You're trying to see life and work from their perspective. And you're trying to understand their patterns, right? Get a feel for their behaviors, their patterns, right? And that's what this interview does. It's super in-depth. So for entry-level talent, this will take between 45 and 70 minutes. And for executives, this can take 2 to 3 hours. And what you want to do here in the beginning of the interview, just like last interview, always important to set expectations. Thanks for coming today. I'm not going to read this script for you. You can read that yourself. You are all fine and smart people. I'm sure you know how to read. But you can say something like that. I used to just say it verbatim, but now I say it my way. The way I kind of described it to you guys earlier, which was, look, the goal of this interview is so I can step into your shoes, understand life and work from your perspective. What I don't say is I'm trying to understand your patterns. I don't want to sound like too investigative. And then I tell people, look, we're going to go in order of, your last 3 or 4 or 5 work experiences. And I'm going to ask the same core questions about each of them. So by the time we go through the first one, you'll get the feel for the format. You'll know what's coming next. So yeah, if you don't have any questions about the process, you can go ahead and get started. And by the way, of course, you'll have time to ask any questions you'd like at the end of the process as well. So they say, all right, cool. We just get on with the process. And first what I do is I ask about their education and their general experience there. And then I ask the following questions about each of their job experiences. And I go through these experiences in chronological order. Before we get to these questions here that you're going to ask, these are the questions you're going to ask about each experience. Before we cover that, this is a big thing, right? How do you... We need the candidate to lay out these experiences, okay? And I've found that if you do not describe what you want from them, like explicitly, hey, what are your last 3 or 4 work experiences? They're just going to spend 40 minutes talking about it most times without you even being able to get any. So what you want to say is something like, hey, okay, so what we got to do first is lay out each of your past 3 work experiences. And when we are laying out these experiences, I'm just going to write them down right here. And I don't need to hear any sort of description about it. All I want to hear is title, your title, and the company name. Because we're going to talk about it. We're going to get to it in a minute here. So I just want to hear title and company. I make it explicitly clear that title and company is all I'm going for right now, because a lot of people will just dive into again, talking about it for 30, 40 minutes. And that's not what you want, because that's going to waste your time. So once you get those experiences, and by the way, you've got to be taking notes during the screening interview, during the top grading interview, during all these interviews, you've got to be taking notes. And so what I do is I put them in, either Google Docs or, we use Airtable for our operating system. So I have an applicant tracking system and an interview tracking system in there and a notes section. So I'll just put it right into there and I'll list 1, 2, and 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how many experiences we are laying out, how many experiences we're going to talk about today. And then I'll just create sub-bullets under each experience. For example, what it would look like is 1. Founder at Zeus Systems LLC. And then I'll just create a sub-bullet and I'll kind of, write notes about it. So stuff like that. So what are the questions? Well, the first thing I ask them, and this is often obvious by their title, but I ask, what were you hired to do? How is your success measured? And I ask that question in two parts. I don't ask both right away. But what you're doing here is you're getting a picture of their scorecard for this particular experience. Now, number two, what accomplishments are you most proud of? This tells you a lot as well. Ideally, candidates are going to tell you about outcomes that match the outcomes of the position you're trying to fill. Be weary of when accomplishments don't meet expectations of the job. What A players do, they'll talk about outcomes linked to expectations. B and C players, they talk about events, people they met, or aspects of the job that they liked without getting into the results. And that's the key. A players, they're proud of the results that they produced. Question 3, what were some low points during that job? That's quite similar to this question right here. What are you not so good at? And again, talented people, they're not going to give you a cookie cutter BS answer. So what I do here is I rephrase it over and over again until the candidate actually answers the question. So I say, what were some low points during that job? They don't really give me a real answer. And I'm like nothing bad happened. Something like that. And maybe we'll even say it a third way, a different way. Number 4, who were some people that you worked with specifically? What was your boss's name and how do you spell that? In the book here, it says, I don't usually say the how do you spell that thing, but, it just seems a little too needy, honestly. But the book says that you should say that, how do you spell that, to make it clear that you're going to call on references and that, they shouldn't lie right here. What was it like working with him or her? What will he or she tell me are your biggest strengths and areas for improvement? And this is my favorite part of the top grading interview. When we talk about each of their 3 or 4 or 5 previous work experiences, this question is most important to me because I want to work with good people that give me life. And if they're constantly having poisonous relationships with their bosses and getting in arguments, and believe me, there are plenty of candidates who have told me about their past arguments with past bosses and frustration with bosses. And again, they're not realizing the irony of they're potentially talking to their potential next boss. And so you can find out almost everything that you need to know just by their answers to this question. So what are we looking for? What does the document say? A players, they'll talk about a great relationship that they have with their boss, and they receive mentoring and coaching, right? It's a mentoring coaching type relationship. B players, they have a more reserved answer. And C players, of course, they're going to talk about the negative aspects. I got in this argument and I didn't like them, and they're silly and stuff like that. And again, this is one, since it's super important, you want to keep reframing questions until you get an actual answer. Now, if it's a manager that you're bringing on to your organization, what you want, and they've had management experience in the past, this is a good question, right? How would you rate your team on an A, B, and C or C scale when you arrived? Did you do anything to improve the team? What would you rate the team as when you left? And if they're not a manager, I ask, what would your team members say about you? And this specifically, this part right here, this is specifically if they are a manager. Do they accept the hand that they're dealt when inheriting a new team, or do they have a growth mindset? Do they work on improvements? What changes do they make? How long does it take? All good things for you to find out if you are hiring leadership into your organization. And then, this is an important one too. I just love all these questions. Number 4, I was saying that's my favorite, but actually number 6 is my favorite. And again, this is one of those ones that'll just tell you almost everything that you need to know. What made you leave that job? And it's very simple. It's either a push or it's a pull. A push as in they were pushed out of that job. Right? Their contract wasn't renewed, or they just weren't needed, right? Or maybe they got fired or something like that. Or maybe they got promoted or they got hired by another organization. They got recruited away. That's more of a pull. They got pulled out of that job. And that's a positive thing. The push is a negative thing. So if we're going through each of these 5 experiences and they've been pushed out of more than 20% of their jobs, so if it's 2 out of 5 that they've been pushed out of, then you cannot hire them. You cannot hire them. What you want here is you want to see a lot of pluses. And what I mean by that is, judging by their answer to this question, whether they were pushed or pulled. If it's a push, I just write in my notes a little minus. And if it's a pull, they were pulled out of that job, then I'll just write a little plus icon. So again, you want to see a lot of pluses right here. If you're seeing minuses, that's no good. Now, if you guys don't have time, if you're going through these questions, you're going through each of their last only 3 experiences, you don't have time to go through 5, or you just don't feel like being that thorough, which I would encourage you to. I would encourage you to go through 5. But anyhow, if you're going through only 3, maybe you just get a few bonus experiences out of them. Like, okay, what are, at the end of the interview, just ask them for like 2 more work experiences that they had. And then ask them, just instead of going through all 6 questions about that experience, just ask the 6th question, like what made you leave that job, and write a little plus or a minus, give you more data. So tactics to master the top grading interview: interrupting. You've got to interrupt the candidate. If not, they're going to talk for 10 hours about things that aren't relevant. And think about it this way: a reframe on interrupting people. It's rude to let someone ramble. It's not rude to interrupt them. That being said, there's a bad way to interrupt and a good way to interrupt. Of course, the bad way is you put up your hand as a stop sign and you just basically very rudely interrupt them, and that interrupts rapport, and that's not very good. The good way to interrupt them is smile, match their energy, and say, "Oh wow, it sounds like blah blah blah. You were just telling me about that direct mail campaign. Can you share more about that?" Keep rapport. The 3 P's right here are: get clear on how valuable an accomplishment is. How does your performance compare to the previous year's performance? How does it compare to the plan? How does it compare to your peers' performance? Right? Performance is relative, and this is a good way to clarify that. Again, push-pull, what we talked about earlier. Don't hire anyone who's been pushed out of 20% or more of their jobs. When asking why they left that job, you'll hear a push or pull response. Painting a picture. You know that you'll understand a candidate's journey when you can see a picture of their journey in your head. This gives you great insight. Again, helps you understand work and life from their perspective, from their point of view. You're stepping into their shoes, understanding their patterns. And at the end of the interview, I tell people, I'm like, man, thanks for taking me on your journey. I really appreciate that. Express that gratitude. And what I said earlier, stop at the stop signs. Watch for shifts in body language and tonalities, inconsistencies. When you see something like that, slam on the brakes, gather more info, clarifying questions. What, how, example, tell me more. You don't want to come off like an investigative journalist, however. Instead, come off like a curious biographer, trying to paint a picture of someone's journey. That's what you're doing right here. That's the bottom line of this interview. Come off like a curious biographer, trying to paint a picture of someone's journey. Like they should feel that energy coming from you. And I know that whenever I do an interview, in the top grading interview, the second interview that we're talking about, they do feel that energy. The focused interview. So look, honestly, the first 2 interviews, those are the meat and potatoes of everything. That's the crux of everything. The focused interview, the 3rd interview, I only do that if I need it, which maybe 1 out of 10 times I need it. It's only if I want to get a closer look at a candidate, something that I maybe heard in the 1st or 2nd interview that maybe I'm unsure of, and I just want to spend like 15, 20 minutes talking about just that. So it says here, purpose of this interview is to get one last look and perhaps even let team members get a look. This way, you can be certain that a candidate and position is a perfect match? Do they match the criteria on the scorecard? Are they a cultural fit? And some general questions you can ask during this focused interview is focus on one thing. Purpose of this interview is to talk about so-and-so. What are your biggest accomplishments in this area, biggest mistakes and lessons learned? But look, a lot of this depends on the context. I think this is going to be a highly customized interview a lot of the time. I don't really go by these scripted questions here for this interview. Again, it's just something that I heard usually in the second interview here that I want to get a closer look at. Tips here: get curious after each answer. Keep asking until you understand what they did and why they did it. Discuss with the team to see if they are a fit, then decide to either move forward or terminate the hiring process right here. By the way, the best is yet to come. I know this is a long document, but we've got some really important stuff to cover that if you miss it, it's no bueno. The reference interview. So this is, of course, when you're calling on references. If you decide to be that thorough and call on references, and you don't have to, but I do recommend it. So the purpose of this interview is to ensure that you're moving forward with an A player by calling on third-party sources to verify. Trust but verify. Pick the right references based on the top grading interview, the experiences that you went through there. Don't just talk to the bosses, talk to the players, right? Their colleagues. Ask candidates to set up the interviews for you. And this can kind of be like a test task. You can get to see like how competent they are. One time I had, actually very recently, it was last week when I was finishing up the hiring process with somebody. He blew me away with how quickly he was able to set up the interview. Just record-breaking speed, and it all worked out, and had great things, and the person had great things to say about him, and it all worked out really well. So that can be a micro test in and of itself, right? Asking the candidates to set up the interviews for you. Now, if you really want to be thorough, conduct 4 reference interviews and ask colleagues to do 3 more. And I would say that this is more for like an executive hire. If you're just hiring a general virtual assistant, then you definitely don't need to do 4 reference interviews and have your colleagues conduct 3 more. So, questions to ask during the reference interview once you get that reference on the line. In what context did you work with the person? What were their biggest strengths or their biggest areas for improvement back then? How would you rate their performance on a 1 to 10 scale? Look for 8 through 10. The person mentioned that they struggled with whatever they mentioned during perhaps the screening interview in this job, or even a low point that they mention when you're talking about the experience in the top grading interview. Can you tell me more about that? Now, obviously, discrepancies should be alarming, and this is a big truth bomb. Bad references, fake praise. It just sounds fake. Carefully chosen words, ums and uhs throughout, if-then statements. Basically like, well, if he has the right people around him, then he does a good job. Conditionally, a conditional statement like that. He only does a good job under such and such conditions. A good reference is legitimate enthusiasm. That's what you're looking for here, really. Now, decide who to hire. The skill-will profile. Examine their skill in relation to the candidate's propensity to achieve each outcome on the scorecard. If they have a 90% chance of achieving it, rate this an A. If the data does not support this conclusion, give a B or a C. Repeat for each outcome. Examine will, the core competencies the candidate brings to the table. If they have a 90% chance or more of displaying that competency, give an A. Give a lower rating if not. Repeat for each competency. An A player's skill and will matches your scorecard. If not, then they're a B or C player for this particular role. Now you know when you've hit the skill will bullseye when you're 90% confident that the candidate can get the job done and be a top 10% performer at that job because their skills match the outcomes on your scorecard. And you're 90% confident that they'll be a good fit because her or his will matches the competency of the role. So, moving on. Red flags. They exaggerate, take credit for the work of others. This is maybe particularly if they're a manager. They speak poorly of past bosses. It goes without saying, like, you give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you hear it once. Okay. If you hear it twice, like, automatic DQ. They can't explain job moves. They're unsupportive of change. They're more interested in compensation and benefits than the job itself. Kind of covered that earlier. That'll show up in the questions the question time that you provide them after each interview. As a manager, they've never had to hire or fire someone. If you're bringing on leadership, that's obviously a critical thing to find out if they've ever had to hire or fire someone. Try too hard to look like an expert. They're self-absorbed, boasting about winning battles that aren't important, like boasting about winning arguments, shit like that. Oh, no, I agree with you, but could mean someone has an overactive ego who needs to tell everyone how smart they are. You don't want that in your organization. A leader taking excessive credit, kind of banking off that. Passing the blame, and then talking crap about other people, making excuses. I mean, these are all just like pretty common sense things. You definitely don't want to be around people that exhibit multiple of these behaviors. Definitely don't want them in your organization. And then lastly, that's just me. Statements like that can indicate that they're not willing to adapt to the culture of your company. I don't really hear that often, but people do say that. Now you're going to make your selection. You take out all of your candidate scorecards or wherever you're keeping them, wherever you're marking them up, whether that be Airtable, Google Docs, wherever. Make sure that all candidates are rated on the scorecard. Look at the data and give a final grade. If there are no A players, then you restart the process. If you've got one A, hire that person. If you've got multiple A's, then rank and hire the top A. This is the big thing. This is probably the biggest value that I could provide for you in this whole document right here. So if you've stayed to watch until this portion, you stayed to watch until this point, congratulations. This is the icing on the cake. Sell the person on joining your team. This has got to happen all throughout the process. You're selling all the way through. You're selling your company, your mission, your vision, the role, your core values. You don't want to overdo it, okay? But there's so many opportunities to sell your organization, the core values, everything about it. So many opportunities to sell all throughout the process. They answer a question, like, what did you like about your last job? And they say something. Oh, well, at Zeus, I think you're going to like it here because, we do that too, or something simple like that. You're selling throughout the whole process. Let me just emphasize that for the fifth time. So you're selling specifically, let's dive into tactics here. You're selling to the 5 F's. Actually, I missed this whole section. This is really important. I always tell candidates in the first interview, the screening interview, when I'm setting expectations with them, I tell them that they will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And I say, because it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street. I'm trying to make sure you're a good fit to come into my organization, but equally, I want you to make sure that this is a good fit for you. I want you to feel good about this. And truly I do. So that's part of selling. You want them to feel good. You don't just want to feel good about it. You want them to feel good about it. You don't want them to just take the job because they're just looking for any job. You want them to strongly desire working at your company in specific above every other company that they're interviewing at, because they are interviewing at other companies. You want yours to stand out. They want to be passionate about joining your company. And as it says here, so many employers only care if it's a fit for themselves and their company. They don't care if it's a fit for the candidate. The bottom line here is that you want to know exactly what your candidates are looking for. And a lot of times I just add on a question to that screening interview, or even at the end of the top grading interview. I just flat out say, like, what are you looking for right now? What are you looking for in a ideal work experience for your next experience? What do you want? And then I ask follow-up questions. I want to know what they're looking for. Number one, so that I feel confident in being able to offer them something that suits their needs and their desires, but also so that I can sell to that. So now we're going to get into that. Selling to the 5 F's. Selling fit. Ties together the organization's vision, needs, strategy, and culture with the candidate's strengths and values. Here's where we're going as a company. Here's where you fit in. This is why you are needed. Pretty simple. Show why you are as much concerned about the fit for them as you are about the fit for you. Again, we covered this. Sell the vision and the potential of the company. A players value the potential of the company. B and C players, not so much. Again, something that we talked about. If they're not asking questions at the end of the screening interview or the top grading interview about your company and its mission or vision, that's a red flag. Family. Well, this is for executives. Definitely not for those entry-level hires. What can we do to make this change easier for your family? Welcome the family. Take them out to dinner. Include the family in the decision-making process. Be sincere about that. Freedom. And look, you can do that to some degree. You don't need to go above and beyond for entry-level talent, but you can do that to some degree with entry-level talent. Show that you care about their life and how their life fits into your company. Anyhow, freedom. Autonomy of the candidate to make his or her own decisions. We give you ample freedom to make decisions without micromanaging. Let them be free to be themselves. And something at Zeus that we always say is, like, we're all about freedom. Number 4, fortune. Of course, financial upside. If you accomplish X, Y, Z, you'll likely make X over the next 5 years. Lend bonuses to scorecard attainment. Right? You reward people based off of how well or how poorly, you hire and fire, reward and take away based off of how well they do with the objectives on their scorecard, the success metrics there. And then fun, the work environment. You're selling the culture. That's huge. You want to sell the culture of your organization. And this is why so many candidates that I interview, they desperately want to work at Zeus, because the 5th F right here, fun. And this is very much like, some candidates may ask explicitly about your culture. Sometimes that happens. How would you describe your culture? And it's good to have, an answer ready. But that's not as important as the energy that you give off. That is an indication of the culture. If you're stressed out and just fidgeting and touching your head, and you just are giving off the stressed out vibes, like, that's not really an attractive environment for people to come in and work at. You definitely want people to feel the warmth in your energy of you. You want people to feel that coming off of you. You want candidates to feel that. That sells your culture in and of itself. So lastly here, to wrap up,
with the 5Fs, find out which of these 5Fs they value the most, sell to that, and sell throughout the entire process as we've been talking about. So there you have it. This is the A method for hiring by ghSmart, or my notes at least from that book. Some of it taken verbatim, some of it in my own words. This document, it should be there should be a link to it. If you'd like to make a copy of this yourself, there should be a link beside this video. Feel free to reach out with any questions. I'm definitely here to help. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.